But up first, the news of the day, Kirk Muller, John McClain as well, Dave Lewis, relieved of their coaching duties in Carolina, gentlemen. Doesn't come to a surprise to either of you two guys?
Not to me. I think the word out of there the last month, Denny, and you were down there a couple of times with the Senators, is that they needed to do a culture change. And that meant trying to change the whole attitude on the bench, change the attitude on the ice, in the dressing room. And Ron Francis, I think this is part of why they gave him the job. He wanted to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Well, I totally agree, and I think that the culture doesn't call for trading Eric Stahl. But you take a look at his numbers since Kirk Muller got there, they've been really bad. And they get worse every year, the last couple of years that Kirk Muller's been behind the bench, to the point where he was a minus 20 last year. I mean, Eric Stahl is not the best two-way centerman in the league, but he's nowhere near that bad. So I think if I'm Ron Francis and taking a look at the effect of Kirk Muller on my lineup, you start with Eric Stahl, and if he's not responding to that kind of coaching, you got to move on.
Yeah, I think one of the things you really have to touch on, Jeff, is what was the identity of the Carolina Hurricanes? Could you measure it? Could you describe it? And they were bland. They were a bland team. There wasn't any grit. They weren't with the quality of the players they had great skill, but how much character? And that, to me, and then you looked at what they had on their blue line, and what in the end they decided that Cam Ward, with the money they owe him, that their better long-term goalie was a guy named Anton Hudobin. I mean, there's it.
But how much of that was just the problem for Kirk Muller there? Like,
well, no, the
goaltending was a huge issue for Carolina.
This is, to me, a change from top to bottom. I think this is, Jimmy moving into the president's job only. Ron, you are now the hockey person, and you go build me a Ron Francis hockey club.
Yeah.
Play the game the way Ron Francis played the game. And I think you'll see a team with a lot more character.
I think you're going to see Ron Francis rolling the dice over the summer. He's going to have a lot of interviews with his scouts. He's going to go out and, with the blessing of the ownership, go out and get some free agents. He's going to try and build up that lineup. He's going to try and get support for the Stahl brothers. He's going to try, as John said, get a lot more support on the back line, and hoping that the goaltending situation works itself out, starting next year.
Who wants to say the name Kevin Dineen first? It's jump ball for it right now. That seems to be the obvious. When you talk about building me a Ron Francis type team, and the Carmanos family, and everything about the Hurricanes has always been about the family, whether it's bringing in Vellucci from Plymouth and the CompuWare system into the organization. Do we have a look at this and say, well, the first phone call that Ron Francis now makes is to Kevin Dineen?
Well, very possibly, because, from what I understand in Florida, Kevin Dineen did not do a great job of communicating with the young players. So maybe a team full of prospects is not necessarily what Kevin Dineen can do. But if he can sort of get if he can get the communication channels open with the veterans, like starting with the Eric Stahl, and they've got some top wingers there. I think in the top six they got some real good talent, but he needs them to perform. He may be the guy.
I think the answer for me is what's the hurry, Jeff? I mean, let's do our due diligence. Let's create a list. Let's look across, different leagues. Let's look into junior hockey. Every time I'm asked to create a list, Mike Johnson is on my list.
With Portland.
In Portland. I mean, let's do this properly rather than just say, well, and we all like Kevin, and Kevin right now might be a little flavor of the month situation, but let's take our time and do it properly, and I fully suspect that Ron Francis will do that.
So there's the news. If you're just joining us, Kirk Muller is out as bench boss of the Carolina Hurricanes. Interestingly enough, Rod Brind'Amour does stay. He's the one, as that axe swung, Rod Brind'Amour was the only member of that staff that ducked and is still a member of the Hurricanes.
No surprise.
What do we read into that?
Rod Brind'Amour is a Cane for life. Rod Brind'Amour is somebody who has, when he was the captain, you knew the character of that team. You knew what he brought to the table. And I might suggest that with what was going on and how it was going on, perhaps Rod Brind'Amour was as frustrated as anybody.
I kind of figure that he's probably going to be there, not as a coaching situation right now behind the bench, but kind of like the Philly structure. You're going to have a guy that is going to be brought in and to try and make immediate changes. And if that doesn't work and you need something in the interim, Rod Brind'Amour may just be that guy, and he's getting more training right now. But I agree with John. He's a lifer in that organization.